Вітаю, ви дивитесь «Громадське», мене звати Viktoriia Roshchyna. Давайте ми трохи далі пройдемо. Питання з приводу... Ні, будь ласка, можна у нас питання?
Її якби теж наравні з всіма і вили, і катували.
So powerful. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Katya Adler, the BBC's Europe editor, and I'm delighted to be joined here by two investigative heavyweights behind this incredible project, the Viktoriia Project, which was only just published last week. Laurent Richard, you are an award-winning film director, but also you are the founder of Forbidden Stories. What is Forbidden Stories? It is a cross-border, non-profit collaboration which pursues and protects and publishes stories by journalists who've been killed, imprisoned, or otherwise silenced. Juliette Garside, Pulitzer Prize winner, you are The Guardian's joint deputy investigations editor. You're known for uncovering financial global crime and corruption, including the Daphne Papers and, the Daphne Project and the Panama Papers. Welcome to both of you. And I just have to say before we continue that we will be hearing graphic details about what happened to Viktoriia and also accounts of torture during this session this morning. Laurent, if I can start with you. First of all, what was Viktoriia investigating before she was taken?
Yeah, so Viktoriia was trying to investigate what was happening to thousands of civilians, Ukrainian civilians who were living under occupation. And she wanted to investigate the condition of their detentions because she knew that thousands of civilians have been detained.
Is it 16,000?
Yeah, we talk about between 16,000 to 20,000 civilians who disappear. We call that the incommunicado. We talk about people without any kind of contact. It's civilians, they are not prisoners of war, they don't have any contact with the outside world, no charges, official charges, no lawyers, and she wanted to investigate that. She knew it was risky, but she was very, very brave. She had been arrested already one time for 10 days by the FSB, and she wanted to come back. And she was very well known to be the only one Ukrainian reporter who was reporting sometimes from the occupied territory.
And before we continue into her investigation and what happened to her, let's hear a little bit more about Viktoriia as a journalist, because she was quite something. And who better to tell us, first of all, about her than her editor at the Ukrainska Pravda, where she was freelancing. Sevgil Museva was also a fundamental part of your joint collaboration. Let's hear what she had to say about Viktoriia.
She was deeply involved on what she was doing. Vika was the only one reporter who covered occupied territory, and for her it was a mission. We discussed with her so many times, you know that it's risky, you know that it's dangerous. She said, okay, you're against that, but you have to know that I'm definitely going.
I'm definitely going. Juliette, a driven journalist. I mean, I think this was, we think, at least the fourth time that she'd gone over into occupied Ukraine. And by the time she was taken, she was the only Ukrainian journalist reporting inside occupied Ukraine. Tell us about her and what you found out about her.
Well, in one word, fearless. She had already been caught once in 2022 and held for a few days, forced to record a propaganda video and then released. And still she went back. And she went back. She crossed through Russia to get into occupied Ukraine under her own name. That was on her last journey. She was a law unto herself. As her editor said there, you couldn't stop her doing what she was doing. She was freelance. She often self-funded her work, actually. And she would ring up after she'd been on her mission and say, I've got this incredible story for you. And they just had to publish it because she was publishing into a blackout. The occupied territories are a black zone. Every independent journalist there has been arrested. And she was gathering evidence, as she saw it, to counter Russian propaganda and to build cases for war crimes against those 16,000 civilians.
There's a quote from Viktoriia. We heard her editor calling her Vika there. That's what her colleagues and her friends called her. She said, there are no Ukrainian journalists there, but there are Ukrainian citizens, so I should go. I mean, this was a mission for her.
Yeah, it was a mission. And she knew the risks that she was taking. She was clever. She would send messages from multiple phones, multiple social media accounts. She would even file her stories in files set to disappear. And she herself would vanish for weeks at a time before re-emerging with her investigations.
And young, really,
7.
really young, and which adds another poignancy to this story, which is quite harrowing, really. And her friends talk about that was her life. Her work was her life.
So, yes, it was. She, Sevgil and friends say she had no partner, really no friends. It's her colleagues who we've gone to about her and her father who helped us immensely during this investigation. But she would work evenings, weekends. She didn't take holidays. She was given a big award in 22. There was a ceremony in Los Angeles. She didn't want to leave the battle zone.
So, Laurent, what happened to Viktoriia, to Vika? Because as we heard, she this at least the 4th time she was going into occupied Ukraine. She was careful. She went through Lithuania, through Latvia, then through Russia, and started the investigation and then disappeared.
Yeah, what happened to Vika, that was exactly the goal of the project. So we decided to team up with 50 journalists from 12 news organizations and to investigate what happened to Vika during her detention and as well about her death. So, as you said, we managed to get some messages sent from her where she was explaining her goal. Her goal was to map detention centers, to name the people behind those systems as well. And she sent some other few messages to some contact in Russian occupied territory that we spoke to, the consortium spoke to. And so she went through Poland to Lithuania, then she went back she crossed the border into Russia and then arrived in Russian occupied territory in Eroda. And at this stage, we lost a trace, no more signal communication. We knew she had been arrested in Eroda, where she had been kept and held for a few days in a kind of police station over there. And then she was sent to Militipol in some garage. Garage is a name that we heard a lot during this investigation. Garage is a name to name the place where torture is happening to many of those Ukrainian civilians who have been arrested.
Because can I say, when you're talking there about detention centres, and this was part of your investigation, I mean, we are talking about garages or informal places, sort of blackout areas. I mean, you found out 180 different sites, 29 of which you found evidence of torture being used.
Yes, out of 86 detention sites, we find out that for 29 of them, confirmation of that torture was systematically used against detainees. We managed to get more than 50 testimonies of former prisoners or people, relatives of prisoners. We managed to get some interviews of people who were living in the same jail at the same time of Vika, and who told us Vika was in the same cell, Vika was in the same jail. I heard about her. And so thanks to that kind of testimonies, we were able to modelize in 3 dimensions those different sites.
They are, I have to say, they are incredible. Some of these 3D models also that you've been able to put together. I mean, Vika ended up in what has been nicknamed, Juliette, Russia's Guantanamo, Taganrog. And it's something that you can see from, the eyewitness testimonies that you've gathered, that the horror that place is associated. Before we talk about what happened to Vika, tell us about Taganrog, because you really dug deep to find out the details.
Yeah, we were determined to look into Taganrog. There are some places that just saying the very word can strike fear. And Taganrog is one of those places. It's used that way to intimidate prisoners elsewhere. If you don't obey, if you don't comply, you'll be sent to Taganrog. Taganrog CZO2 on the Sea of Azov is where they sent the captured brigades, the Azov brigades who defended the siege of Mariupol, and they are the most loathed by the Russians of the Ukrainian fighters. But they also took people like Vika there, and the conditions, they've described it as a black hole. It's like Sednaya in Syria. Just to give you, I'm really sorry to go into the details, but I think it's important. They had a suite of torture rooms in the basement, and prisoners 3 floors above could hear the screams. There was a room with an electric chair, we've been told. We interviewed more than 30 released former prisoners. There was a room with a tub for waterboarding. Prisoners were electrocuted in the showers. They were beaten twice a day during cell inspections. They had to walk through the corridors with their eyes closed, bent forward in a stressed position called a swan, with their hands clasped behind their backs. They were beaten in the exercise yards. It was constant. And they were starved. Adult males, one of the medics there told us, adult males lost up to a quarter of their body weight while they were there. Meals consisted of 15 pieces of pasta.
And I think it's that fear that you talked about. I mean, we'll hear about Vika in a minute, but one of the things that struck my mind is she spent a lot of her time there in a fetal position. I mean, that's, just imagining it. As you say, you gathered so many testimonies also from guards who left Taganrog and have spoken about it afterwards. Let's hear from 2 of the testimonies you gathered, one from Taganrog and one from another detention center that Russia uses inside occupied Ukraine.
Чесно, Таганрог – це, певно, паща із зубами, яка просто перемелює, перегризає, перекусує, ламає волю і просто з людини робить істоту. Як людина, не коштує нічого. Людське життя – це нуль. Тобто вони хотіли бити, вони били. Вони хотіли використовувати струм, вони використовували. Вони хотіли чоловіків саджати на пляшки, вони садили.
Я там нічого не бачила, бо майже весь час перебувала в мішки на голові. Вимога стояти з 6 ранку до 10 вечора. Я одного разу просто вже не могла стояти, в мене розвалювалася спина, я втрачала свідомість.
In a number of these areas, as you've uncovered, as we said, that 29 at least of these detention centres, that torture was used, often including sexual assault or threats of sexual assault as well. What do we know of some of these awful tortures, and there are more, Juliette, that you've described? What do we know happened to Vika? Because there was hope, wasn't there, Laurent? There was a phone call to her parents. Even the Pope got involved.
Yeah, we know from all the testimonies that she was in a very bad condition. She was down to 30 kilograms at some point. We know as well that from other prisoners that some of them told us that she was the bravest. She was, even in that kind of condition, she was challenging the guard all the time.
She insulting them.
She shot on them, saying that you are the torturers, you are occupying our territories. And she was not silent, even at this stage, even in that kind of condition. So she was brave, and she was still brave. And at some point, there was some hope, as you say, because there were some negotiation to have her released. So she was on the list of potential exchange of prisoners. And one day, in August 24, a father received a phone call.
The first call to her parents in a year.
The first call in a year. It's very unique when a ghost prisoner, where a civilian detained in Russia is able to call someone outside, in the outside world. And he received that call, and then on the other side, that was Vika. And she told Daddy, I will be released, and I'm so happy for that. So be prepared to welcome me at home. And I'm so happy for that. And the conversation lasts for 3 to 5 minutes. And so the father and Vika were so happy about that. And that was in August 24. But a few weeks later, no exchange happened. Vika was not sent back. And instead, the father received just a formal letter from the Russian authorities telling him that she was dead.
Can you imagine? And I think, again, she says, Daddy, he and Vika's mum say, make sure you eat. And she promises to eat. It's these human details that you've uncovered as well that really drive home the story. And it's a microcosm of what's happened to all of those other people. Juliette, there was this call, there was the hope, there was then a release. Vika wasn't there, but that was in autumn. Right? But we didn't hear news of her body being returned to Ukraine until about 2 weeks ago. Why?
So for months, her family were calling for the return of her remains. And it turns out that they were repatriated as part of this massive exchange. There were 757 Ukrainian bodies returned. The Russians recuperated some of their dead as well, with the Red Cross acting as intermediaries. And there's this list. And the last entry on the list is just unidentified male, number 757. And so it's only when they get all the bodies to the morgue and they start taking off the coverings and looking, and they find a tag with her name. But the hair had been shaved and the body was in such a bad state that identification was really difficult. The parents gave DNA samples and it was a match. It was a 99% match. So this was her. But what we're learning now, and what we learned right up until a few days before publication, is they took her apart in so many ways. She was tortured in Melitopol. There were scars up and down her arms, burn marks between the toes from electric shocks. But also right at the end, it looks like she suffered violence. They found a broken bone in the neck that indicates possible strangulation. They found cuts, fresh cuts on the head and the hip and a broken rib. And they found that key organs, and I'm sorry again, but I think it's important to talk about these distressing details, but there was another attempt at a cover-up. They had removed the brain and her eyes and parts of her larynx, so that the prosecutors who have opened a war crimes investigation into this case, it's going to be very difficult to be precise about the cause of death.
I was about to say, one can assume, but it's hard to know.
It's hard to know. We can see it was violent, but we may never know. But they have war crimes investigators on her case, and they've said to us that they hope that her case can be a test case, a pilot case for an international prosecution, whether that's at the International Criminal Court or a country like Germany that does international prosecutions.
Because in your testimonies, there's some sort of curious detail almost. I mean, Vika refused food, didn't she, for a while during her detention. And at some point, the Russian authorities put her on a drip in a hospital. The guards said that they asked fellow sort of cellmates, what does she like to eat? So almost to assume that there was preparation for handing her over, she was seen as valuable. And then one of the testimonies you've heard with a cellmate or somebody nearby in the cell saying that the fact that she wasn't handed over, and quoting, was her fault.
So one of the FSB officers told a fellow inmate, she didn't make it, it was her fault. But they did try to keep her alive. They took her to hospital, as you say, where she was under armed guard, 6 guys with balaclavas and machine guns. She was clearly a high-value prisoner. They'd gone to the Vatican to get her release, to get her put on the release list. But I don't want to speculate, but she was not in good shape, and they may have been worried about releasing her in that condition, about the headlines.
So you've investigated, along with this huge global collaboration, into as much as we can know, what happened to Vika. What about the rest of the 16,000 civilian disappeared? Because now that there's talk about a possible ceasefire in Ukraine, we talk about land, we talk about security guarantees, but we are not hearing very much about these civilians.
We hear so little about them. One of the reasons is they're not released. There are many prisoner exchanges of soldiers, but very few of civilians. So they're not there to talk for themselves. Their families and NGOs are saying, unconditional release of these 16,000 before any kind of peace deal is signed. And you know what some of the released prisoners have been telling us? They remember, I'm sorry to go back in time, but 1941, Stalin's troops are retreating out of Poland and Ukraine and Lithuania. They take 350 political prisoners into the labor camps, into the gulags. Those who don't die on the death march, they die in Russia. They never return home. That's what's in the mind of everybody in Ukraine right now, all those families.
Yeah, all the loved ones. Laurent, again, I mean, sadly, not enough time, but this was a massive collaboration, a huge effort. We talked briefly about Forbidden Stories, I did at the beginning. Why do you think this is the way forward for journalism?
I think the collaborative way, the way we did it, and the way we are doing that at Forbidden Stories for the past 7, almost 8 years now, it's the only way to do it. And we are living in a time where we are facing a kind of new global axis from the west to the east, from Trump to Putin, where we are, as journalists design, name as the enemy of the people. So we are facing more and more challenges. Either it's cyber surveillance, ghost prisoners, harassment online, slap action. So for that kind of very difficult investigation, we need to team up. This is what we are doing with Forbidden Stories and with The Guardian and many international teams abroad. I should mention as well that the first team we team up was the Ukrainian team as well at the beginning of the project, but as well with Russian journalists living in exile as well. So that's we did the Gaza project in the same approach, working with both Israeli journalists and Palestinian journalists and foreign journalists as well. And I think that kind of global approach is a need, is a solution, is a future of journalism, living in the time where we are under severe threats. That's the only way to keep stories alive, and that's our mission at Forbidden Stories.
And it's a non-profit, so this is, again, it's belief, which is something that, as we said, that Viktoriia had very much. You mentioned right at the beginning, Juliette, back in 22, Viktoriia was given an award for courage, the award ceremony in Los Angeles by the International Women's Media Foundation. She didn't want to stop working to get this prestigious prize. Instead, she said, "We have remained faithful to our mission to convey the truth to the world, countering Russian propaganda. Unfortunately, many journalists have died. I want to dedicate this award to them. After all, they died in the fight of truth." Thank you.